Hello, everyone. I'm Cassandra McCullough, Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Black Cardiologists. On behalf of the Rare Disease Diversity Coalition, of which my organization is a member, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar event, Black and Rare Understanding APOL1 Mediated Kidney Disease. This webinar is being planned today in collaboration with Vertex Pharmaceuticals. The Rare Disease Diversity Coalition was formed to address the challenges that marginalized populations face when seeking diagnosis and accessing treatment for rare diseases. Launched by the Black Women's Health Imperative and comprised of a group of healthcare nonprofits, patient advocacy groups, as well as industry experts, the RDDC aims to educate and empower rare disease patients of color to reduce the time between the onset of symptoms and diagnosis and eliminate racial bias. Today, our expert panelists will discuss the causes of APOL1 genetic variants and the medical outcomes that can arise from them. They will also discuss strategies and raise awareness and mobilize stakeholders so that African Americans who are more likely to suffer APOL1 related kidney disease than other racial and ethnic groups can receive more timely diagnoses and treatment. So thank you for joining us for this important discussion. Ms. Hopkins, the mic is yours.
Cassandra, thank you so much. And I want to say good afternoon to you. My name is Adriana Hopkins. I'm a news anchor at ABC7 in Washington, D.C. I want to extend a very warm welcome to all of you and say thank you so much for joining us for today's program, Black and Rare Understanding APOL1 Mediated Kidney Disease. As you heard Cassandra say, the RDDC does a really great job of bringing together leading experts to spread awareness about rare diseases and how Black, Brown, and low-income communities are affected, and to also offer solutions. So today you'll hear from Dr. Ogre Igbona, the Vice President of Clinical Development for the APOL1 Mediated Kidney Disease Program at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. The goal there is to develop a potentially curative treatment for the underlying cause of AMKD. And he also offers pro bono advice to the leadership of Kidney Solutions, a kidney disease and dialysis center in Nigeria. Nurse Kristen Hood also joins us. She is the Executive Director of Research and Engagement at NephCure International. She specializes in patient-centered education and devotes her time to community through education and research initiatives. And that includes connecting with patients through personal and virtual platforms with the goal of helping people improve their health outcomes. We will join them in a discussion shortly, but we begin with a patient's story about her experience with kidney disease, followed by a presentation about APOL1 mediated kidney disease with Dr. Igbona.
My name is Dr. Kendra Richardson. I am a family medicine physician, and I am living with APOL1 mediated FSGS. I lived pretty much a normal childhood. The only ailment that I came down with at a young age was high blood pressure. I've noticed I was getting headaches around 17 or so. They said it was just genetic. My mom and my father had it, was put on a diuretic, and that pretty much controlled my symptoms. I went through medical school 4 years. It wasn't until my last year of residency. We had a lot of financial planners come speak to us. There was a recommendation to get disability insurance. So of course I was like, sure, I'm healthy. I got the labs back and the blood work was okay, but I had all this protein in my urine. Of course I was denied the insurance, but those were kind of the least of my concerns at that point. I was also so concerned about what was going on with my body. I referred myself to the nephrologist. He told me that first visit he thought I had FSGS. He said, I think it's APOL. He explained to me that it was very common in African American populations. So at that point, I was very nervous. This changed so much about my life in such a short period of time. And I felt a little betrayed because I had been so healthy throughout my life. I was on the phone with my mom and she was like, your dad wants to talk to you. And so he tells me that he was diagnosed with FSGS 12 years ago. I started to feel a little bit better about the diagnosis. knowing that I didn't cause this to myself, and this is a genetic condition that I passed down from my parents, and we don't get to pick that. I try to encourage my family and my patients to talk more about their health, good, bad, or indifferent, just to talk about it, because I don't think we do that enough.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Ogre Igbona, and I hope you enjoy that video as much as I did. I'm the Vice President for Clinical Development for Kidney Disease Programs here at Vertex, and I'm a trained nephrologist, and I've cared for patients like Dr. Richardson with kidney disease for several years. A special thanks goes to the Rare Disease Diversity Coalition for hosting this important webinar today on APOL1 mediated kidney disease. And it's an honor to have the opportunity to be here today and join my distinguished colleagues to talk about an extremely important topic. Vertex is a global biotechnology company that invests in scientific innovation to discover medicines for people living with serious diseases such as cystic fibrosis, sickle cell disease, as well as APOL1 mediated kidney disease. At Vertex, we don't look to make incremental progress. We take on the challenges where we think we can have a transformational effect, and we aim to accomplish this by only pursuing approaches that address the underlying cause of disease. To that point, we're tirelessly focused on researching and discovering potential medicines aimed at treating the underlying cause of diseases such as APOL1 mediated kidney disease. So with that, I'll start my conversation with the next slide, which is, why are we having this discussion today? One may ask, why bother? Well, the reason is pretty simple. If you start with the figure to the left, it shows that there's a disparately higher burden of kidney disease by race, with an almost 4 times higher prevalence in Black people compared to whites. So not only is kidney disease a huge physical and emotional stress to patients and their families, but it also has very serious financial implications. And the figure to the right gives you an idea of the rapidly rising costs to individuals, both out of pocket and to the healthcare system as kidney disease progresses. And you can see that for those that advance all the way to end-stage kidney disease, we're talking of expenses just related to the dialysis procedure itself in the order of nearly $100,000 a year. Now, there are many causes for this disparity, and we do know that a substantial amount of this disparity is related to imbalances in socioeconomic opportunity and access to care and other institutional barriers that disproportionately impact minorities. However, we do know that some of this disparity has a genetic basis. So on the next slide, we talk about, one may ask, what is the biologic basis for some of this disparity in kidney disease that we see in Black communities around the world? Well, some of this burden of kidney disease is what we call APOL1 mediated kidney disease. And the story behind APOL1 mediated kidney disease starts with how we as humans evolved to fight certain infections over thousands of years. Parasites called trypanosomes that cause what is called African sleeping sickness in humans is the parasite that we have all come to develop some evasion mechanisms against. And we all have a gene, regardless of your racial background, called the APOL1 gene that protects against certain trypanosomes. But over thousands of years, these parasites have become resistant to APOL1, and humans have evolved as well. And in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, where these infections occur at high frequency, people develop what we call variants of the APOL1 gene that has enabled them to fight these resistant parasites. So a clear evolutionary advantage important to living and surviving in places where these infections are prevalent. These variants, however, have risen into a high frequency in Africa because they defend patients and enable them to live successfully. On the next slide, the APOL1 gene, just to share a little bit more about the gene, is part of what we call the APOL1 gene family. And this gene produces proteins that play an important role in the innate immune response of the body to fight threats such as infections. And in 2010, scientists showed that higher rates of two severe kidney diseases in African Americans could be attributed to variants in a gene called APOL1. And as people from these regions have the genetic variants have moved around the world, initially as a result of slave trade and more recently from migration, these genetic variants in the APOL1 gene were taken with them. And today, people of African descent may carry these APOL1 genetic variants and include people that identify either as African American, Afro-Caribbean, or Latino. And the map to the left shows the frequency with which these genetic variants occur and where they more frequently occur in the sub-Saharan region. And the figure to the right shows the figures of the parasites that can be killed by the regular APOL1 gene protein, as well as the genetic variants of APOL1 that protect against the more resistant forms of the parasite. So this gives you a background of how we have evolved as people. For those that have recent ancestry from Africa, to fight against parasites, but this evolutionary advantage does come with a cost that puts some people with the APOL1 genetic variants at higher risk for kidney disease. And on the next slide, I just want to show that we think some, but certainly not all of the disparity that we see in the burden of kidney disease can now be attributed to the genetic variants of the APOL1 gene, which again is found only in those of recent African ancestry. And approximately 13% of people who identify as African American have two of these APOL1 genetic variants that increase the risk of kidney disease. A large proportion, 45%, do not have APOL1 genetic variants, and in these patients, there are other drivers for disparity in the burden of kidney disease. It is estimated that 4 out of every 10 African Americans with end-stage kidney disease, either on dialysis or that have received a transplant, have these APOL1 variants. So these statistics give us a lot to think about. And we know the impact of chronic kidney disease on communities of color represent a major challenge, all of which makes the attention to kidney disease and increasing awareness and figuring out what to do to address this even more important. So let's move to the next slide and talk about how the disease progresses. Well, in a few words, I can say that this disease progresses pretty fast, faster than it often takes people to even come to terms with their condition. And to the left, there's a graph that shows the survival analysis of one of the ways that APOL1 mediated kidney disease presents as FSGS. Dr. Richardson described her having FSGS, and that's one of the ways that it could present. And if you look at this figure to the left, you can see the darker blue line that goes down much more quickly. And this indicates that about half of the patients from the time they're diagnosed have lost their kidney within 5 years. And this is compared to those that do not have two APOL1 genetic variants, where half of the patients with such a disease as FSGS have lost their kidney in 12 to 13 years. So a much faster progression of the disease. To the right is another way that APOL1 mediated kidney disease could present, often called hypertensive kidney disease. And in that situation as well, half of the patients have gone on to kidney failure requiring dialysis or transplant in a similar period of time. So, how does the APOL1 variant cause disease? On the next slide, as I mentioned, not all people have, or people that identify as Black or have or recent African ancestry have two APOL1 variants. And even more interesting, not all people with two APOL1 variants develop APOL1 mediated kidney disease. However, we do know that certain triggers, or what we call second hits, that could either be an infection, an inflammatory condition, increase the expression and activity of these APOL1 genetic variants. And then these variants, as you can see to the picture to the right, damage certain cells that are meant to filter blood. As you know, the kidney is a very special organ that filters all the waste from the food and the water we drink and other things that we take in, and extracts those waste products, and we pass it out in the urine. Certain special cells called podocytes and other glomerular endothelial cells make up that special filtration mechanism in the kidney. And when the APOL1 variants become active from this second hit, they start damaging these filters, and this is what leads to very rapidly progressive kidney disease. On the next slide, we talked, or I mentioned a few moments ago, on the different ways that APOL1 mediated kidney disease can present. It could present as what we call FSGS, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, or as hypertensive kidney disease. Sometimes patients with lupus nephritis could have two APOL1 variants, and the progression of their disease is much faster. But regardless of the way it presents, whenever the APOL1 genetic variants are involved, the progression of the disease is much faster, and it presents primarily as protein. And as I mentioned, protein gets into the urine when the filtration mechanism for the kidney gets damaged. There shouldn't be any protein in the urine initially. On the next slide, the question is, how do I know if I have kidney disease in the first place, or APOL1 mediated kidney disease in particular? Well, many kidney diseases, including APOL1 mediated kidney disease, could be silent and only show symptoms when it's advanced. But in some cases, it could happen pretty quickly, and it presents as tiredness, swelling in the legs and feet, weight gain, or a change to the color and appearance of the urine. And in all these circumstances, you find most patients find themselves then going to the doctor and then being surprised that the kidney disease has advanced pretty much. So the question is, what do we do about it? How do we find out if someone has APOL1 mediated kidney disease? And on the next slide, there's some pretty simple tests that could be done. There are blood tests that can be used to measure how well the kidney is filtering waste products from the blood. And then there are urine tests that can be used to check for protein to find out if the kidney filters, are working the way they should. In order to identify the APOL1 genetic variants, you would need to do a test called genotyping. It could be using a blood sample or a saliva sample. And then in some situations, you may need a biopsy, which your doctor would recommend in order to make sure that nothing else might be going on. So on my last slide here, so what are the key takeaways? Well, the first is that there are many causes of kidney disease. APOL1 mediated kidney disease is one of them. And we now know that APOL1 mediated kidney disease is caused by APOL1 genetic variants that are found in people of recent African ancestry. It offers a survival advantage against these parasitic infections, but is a disadvantage in terms of the risk for kidney disease. We do know that early to middle stages of kidney disease do not have signs or symptoms, but that simple tests can be used to identify evidence of kidney damage and offer an opportunity to intervene earlier. Genetic testing can identify genetic drivers for disease to help inform the best options for treatment. And I think one of the ways we can think about this in the simplest of terms is that in addition to not feeling too well, if you have family members that have kidney disease, it might be a good idea to get checked out yourself. So with that, that ends my presentation. I want to thank you for your attention, and I will hand over back to Adriana.
All right, doctor, that was very thorough. Thank you so much for the presentation there. I don't want you to go too far, but I do want to bring in Nurse Kristen Hood because Dr. Igbona, you really did a good job of explaining the signs and symptoms of advanced kidney disease. But Kristen, I want to ask you, when you come in contact with your patients, how does that play out in their lives, their quality of life? How is this affecting them?
Yeah, great question. I think it depends on where they are in their journey, to be honest with you. Recently I spoke to a patient with FSGS, actually APOL1 mediated FSGS. And, the patient is actually doing well right now. But where they are in the journey really depends on that quality of life factor, right? So when you talk about the signs and symptoms, right, you talk about the fatigue, the swelling, the edema, the weight gain. These factors really play a big part in daily living activities, right? I mean, there are a lot of people, depending on where they are in the stage of kidney disease, if they are so tired that to get up and go to the restroom or to get up and shower is absolutely exhausting, how are they able to lead a productive life in our community, right? Likewise, there's been some studies out there to show that edema and swelling is the #1 complaint with people who have chronic kidney disease. And that is definitely one of the clinical symptoms, those signs and symptoms that patients see initially. It's also interesting because, recently, again, talking to a patient with this particular disease, I asked, well, how did you find out? Did you have symptoms? And their answer was, it was actually a fluke. It was, went to, had the blood pressure taken at a normal checkup, and it was high, but was told just to watch it, right? So months went by, visiting a family member, and the patient checks, playing around with the blood pressure machine in the house, right, at the family member's house. And the family member said, hey, this isn't normal. And was like, no, you really you need to go to an urgent care. So at this whole spectrum of time, not one time was a urine sample ever taken to just dip it with a dipstick to find out if this patient was spilling protein. And so when they went to the urgent care, the patient the only symptom this particular patient was having was a headache, most likely related to the high blood pressure, right? So when they went to urgent care, there was a more thorough assessment done with a urinalysis, and it showed that there was a significant amount of protein in the urine. And so that's what kind of spun the whole patient down this diagnostic journey. But it wasn't anything that was, just very clear sign or symptom. It was literally what they call a fluke,
I do want to ask both of you, how often is this misdiagnosed, or how often is there a delayed diagnosis?
Maybe I'll take a stab at that. And like I mentioned, we only knew about the APOL1 gene barely more than 10 years ago. Or rather, we only knew about the role that it plays in progressive kidney disease barely 10 years ago. Before then, we've called diseases either by the way they're treated or the way people feel, or the response to treatment, or the way, a sample of tissue, like I mentioned earlier, a biopsy specimen looks under the microscope. So what that does is it puts us in a less than perfect way of treating the underlying cause of disease. Mm-hmm. And we found ourselves over the years as a clinical community trying our best to try and stem progressive kidney disease with what we think might work, but hasn't really worked, especially for patients with APOL1 kidney disease. Kristen, you want to share some thoughts on this too?
Yeah, I think that within the kidney disease space, there is definitely the innovation and discovery around diagnostics, and actually using those diagnostics to include genetic testing right now, to try to find a more precise diagnosis has been lacking, right? And so there's a lot of work going on in our nephrology space around improving diagnosis, shortening the time it takes for a patient to get to a nephrologist, right? To get to that kidney specialist. We feel at NephCure, especially if you're dealing with a rare glomerular disease like APOL1 FSGS, these people should not be treated by a primary care physician. They need to be treated by a physician who specializes in these diseases, right? And so we work hard at NephCure to really shorten the time, to diagnosis. And how do we do that? By education, by awareness, by working with other organizations, government agencies, other key opinion leaders, to really get the message out around a simple screening. Doesn't take a whole lot, right? Like at least once a year, you should go to the doctor and get screening. And part of that screening should be around a kidney panel or the dipping of a urine, which takes like less than $1 to really do, right? So these simple things really need to be advanced in our medical community so that more people can get diagnosed early. Because what we do also know, Adriana, is that the earlier that they're diagnosed, the earlier that they can get treatment or have those changes in their lifestyle so they can try to self-manage their disease, is that if they can retain their native kidneys, their quality of life will be better for a longer period of time.
I want to piggyback on your comments about treatment and, just for the layman, what does treatment entail? Are we treating symptoms, and is this a cocktail of medications every single day indefinitely? Is there dialysis? Is there eventually kidney transplant? How does that play off?
Yeah, so we always try our best to avoid patients going on to requiring dialysis or transplant. And a lot of the treatments that currently exist are non-specific. They don't get to the underlying cause, but they're important because they help address complications of disease. Very often, kidney disease causes high blood pressure, and that high blood pressure can even cause, more rapid progression of kidney disease. So controlling blood pressure is pretty important. And then when we do know what exactly may be causing kidney disease, there are other medications that we might use in order to try and reduce the rate of progression. For other symptoms that were mentioned, like the swelling, we might use what we call diuretics or water pills, for some that might have heard of this before, to help get rid of the excess fluid that's accumulating and causing swelling.
Dr. Igbona, I have a two-part question for you. The first part is there a specific age range in which this particular kidney disease shows up or reveals itself? Does it occur more in men than women? And then I'll ask you also to kind of talk about the disparity between Black people and white people in terms of getting to that end stage renal disease.
Yeah, so what we do know is that there's no difference for APOL1 mediated kidney disease. There's no gender bias. So males and females, it's an equal opportunity kind of condition. It does impact people mostly in that on the younger side. Over 80% of people that would be diagnosed with APOL1 mediated kidney disease are below the age of 50, which is pretty young.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your second question, I'm blanking on the second one.
Understood. Black and African American patients
yes.
with the disparity between Black and African American patients to the end-stage renal disease compared with their white counterparts.
Yes. In that regard, like I mentioned during my presentation, there are many causes of kidney disease. APOL1 mediated kidney disease is one of them. And that certainly, by virtue of the genetic variants being essentially expressed in those of recent African ancestry, that can explain the disparity for the few that have the APOL1 variants. But there are other causes of kidney disease, and we still know that there is a disproportionate burden amongst people, minority groups. And a lot of that, is related to socioeconomic factors, as well as access to healthcare, and perhaps other precise causes of kidney disease that we're not aware of. So I think that sort of sums up the burden that we see, and it's something that we all have to recognize, because I guess the first part of addressing the solution is identifying what the problem is.
Absolutely. And part of that, Kristen, I'll bring you in here, is the testing that you brought up, whether it's a urine test or a genetic test. People will argue genetic testing costs money. What would you say to that?
Yeah. And they're not wrong, right? I mean, historically, genetic testing has been extremely expensive. Many times insurance companies will not cover it. However, I would tell people that it doesn't have to be cost prohibitive anymore. There are options out there. With this innovation and discovery around more genetic basis of FSGS to include APOL1, but many other genetic variants that cause FSGS as well, right? So Dr. Ogre Igbona has said that there's many types of kidney disease and there are many types of FSGS. So, genetic testing is a lot more available. It's commercially available now. That's easy to access. You can even just get on the Googles and look up free genetic testing and you'll find some resources there. There's also several academic sites around our country that actually have genetic testing associated with FSGS and particularly with APOL1. And so that there's a lot of resources out there, and those types of academic sites, they don't require payment a lot of times. The important piece around patient care, though, with genetic testing, I want to say, not only is the results important to know, but it's also how they are given to the patient, right? So at NephCure, we really believe that probably the most important piece to genetic testing is that genetic counseling piece. Where a genetic counselor who's certified in counseling as well as the genetic piece of the test can actually really go over it and really counsel the patient into talking to them about what does this really mean? And they can answer some of those really hard questions that people have around, what does this mean for my child? Is my child able to have children in the future? Should my child, right? So these questions that come up that are sometimes taboo. One thing that we've learned as we've gone through this journey, especially when we have really tried to engage more with the Black and Brown community with kidney disease, is that what we've learned is that a lot of times people will tell us, my health is my personal business. It's not anything that we talk about, right? Like even in the family, we don't talk about this. And this is something that we've learned. And so what we also want to do is that for people to understand that if there is a history that grandma was on dialysis or my uncle died of kidney disease or my brother has kidney disease, maybe ask why. Does it really have to stay personal? Because the more information that you can get, the more empowered that you can be to take care of not only yourself, but maybe those dependents or those children or the spouse or the other family members that you have around you. So genetic testing is really important. And like I said earlier, there's this wave of more personalized medicine in nephrology because there's been so much research. They've been able to find these pathways, these biological pathways, like for APOL1, they've been able to identify this APOL1 pathway that really might be causing that more rapid progression of disease that causes end-stage kidney disease sooner than other forms. Well, if we have found the pathway, then maybe there's a drug development that can help stop the progression, right? We can't take necessarily the disease away. You know, I tell people a lot of times we're out to find the cure of no cures, right? But part of that is just stopping the progression. And it really starts with getting screened, you know, going to your doctor and getting a screening and asking questions.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about Black and brown communities and people not really expressing their health history.
Yep.
I think part of that has to do with the shame often given to people. You know, you don't eat right, you don't exercise, it's your fault that you're in this position. And I think that's probably one of the barriers that has to be broken for people to be honest and say that a doctor, yes, my mom, my dad, my aunt, uncle, cousin, grandparents, but that's another obstacle to break down, I guess, in Black and brown communities. You know, I want to ask you, Dr. Igbona, to talk more about Vertex and how it's addressing the challenges associated with APOL1 mediated kidney disease.
Yeah, so as I had mentioned earlier on in my opening comments, Vertex has a track record of going after diseases at the very heart of what's driving them. In cystic fibrosis, for instance, I remember reading about cystic fibrosis as a medical student, and it was essentially a death sentence for patients. Now there are people that live with it and thrive with it. And, you know, a lot of that is based on work that many others, but, certainly Vertex has led to develop, medicines that go to the heart of disease. Sickle cell disease, another very important, disease that I'm quite sure, communities of color have to contend with. Vertex has been at the forefront there as well, coming up with, essentially functional cures for sickle cell disease that make patients no longer have bone pain crises or other crises and are essentially transfusion free. We hope to do the very same thing with APOL1 mediated kidney disease.
You know, there's clinical trials that happen for diseases, a wide variety of diseases. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic really showed that there's one particular type of patient that's often involved in these clinical trials, mainly white people, specifically white men. Are you all finding in clinical trials for kidney disease the same issues, or are they becoming more diverse?
Well, I can speak specifically for APOL1 mediated kidney disease, that the overwhelming majority of patients that, especially during the pandemic, because COVID-19 counts as a second hit, that infectious trigger, that will increase the activity of the APOL1 genetic variant, and people that never had kidney disease before would now develop it, or those that had it before have even more rapidly progressive disease.
Wow.
So, even the world we live in right now with the ongoing pandemic, it does have its effects on minorities, and some would say it explains some, certainly not all of the disparity that we see in healthcare, even during the pandemic.
Kristen, would you have any comment on the research that you all are doing? Have you seen more diverse clinical trials and a focus on diversifying the research?
Well, I have to say, the FDA and government agencies have always stressed that in clinical trials, you must include the people that will take the medicine, right? Like that need the medicine, right? So there's obviously a high unmet need in the Black and brown community to participate in clinical trials. However, I'm going to go back, to this barrier of even just knowing that you have kidney disease. So if you don't even know you have kidney disease, because if you go back to some of those symptoms, Adriana, like fatigue, weight gain, swelling. How many times can I probably even say as a nurse, working the floor 12 plus hours a day, that I can go home and I can say, yeah, you know what? My feet are swollen. I was on my feet all day. I'm really tired. I have 3 kids and a dog. And, how can I just put this in the back of my head and think, you know what? It's just how my life is right now. It's just another day. But when you're talking about these symptoms, we need to ask more questions, right? So I want to say, to get people to be more involved in clinical trials, number one, they need to understand that there's not one medicine on pharmacy shelves that didn't go through a clinical trial, right? Including some of those that are just off the shelf that you can go and pick up, right? Without a prescription. So people need to understand there's a lot of myths and facts around clinical trials that NephCure really tries to debunk all the time. Number one, we want patients to know that around the safety of clinical trials, that the patient safety is always number one. Honestly, it's the primary goal, to keep our patients safe. And if we can find a drug or a treatment option that, especially with kidney disease, to prevent, kidney disease, working or progressing, then that is going to help the community overall. But what NephCure has done recently this year is we've had some very specific health equity programming. And we've really taken like this multifocal approach to it. First of all, we started with a patient advisory board and a health equity steering committee. And so we took the patients who are in the diverse communities and we brought them together, and we wanted to ask them, for their impressions, their perceptions, their needs. What do they see the community needing so that we can elevate awareness and education around kidney disease? Then we also had a health equity steering committee. So these are experts like Ogo and others that we brought together and said, you know what, let's take this scientific medical approach, but you know what, the patient voice is super important here, right? So within that approach, we had a community approach, we had a physician engagement approach, and then we had a marketing approach. So within the physician engagement, there was specific marketing and messaging to physicians that we put out. We put out ads like in places that we know nephrologists are reading. So ASN Kidney News during Kidney Week, we had a full page ad around the disparity of Black and brown communities and kidney disease. We also had another one in CJSON, which is another, big journal, scientific research journal, an ad in there saying 1 in 8, are, predisposed to, higher rates of kidney disease. And then because of all of that, we also put out more resources around genetic testing, not only for physicians to see, because what we also know is that physicians aren't prescribing genetic testing a whole lot, even though a lot of the discovery and innovation is really going to that personalized medicine side that includes the genetic variants, right? So we really did a lot of that. So in the marketing side, we had a national awareness campaign that we did that was amazing. We had, over 40 pieces of marketing materials that were out there. So if people were in those Google machines, right, and, searching up, fatigue, swelling, foamy urine, all of these like key indicators that we know are signs and symptoms of kidney disease, that maybe they would see an ad pop up, right? It was targeted to the Black community, specifically Black young males, and so we wanted to reach that. So that campaign did marvelously, over 10 million views, lots of click-throughs. They got educational resources from NephCure that were curated through this health equity initiative. The other piece to that was the patient community. So what we also know, remember, health is a personal business. We don't really talk about it outside. Right. But what we also know at NephCure is one of the most valuable pieces of education is patients sharing their story. And so we had, and where do patients go? Where do they trust the information that they get the most? Well, what we have learned is that they go to their faith-based organizations. They go to their churches. They go to their synagogues. They go to where they have the most trust in the people that work there. So we partnered with an organization called Heal Collaborative, and we had 2 health equity programs that were faith-based grassroots outreach, community conversations, if you will, one in Atlanta and one in Chicago this year. And these were community conversations around chronic kidney disease. Because we know if we go in there and talk about FSGS, they're going to be like, what? What is that?
Yeah.
But if we talk about chronic kidney disease, because, FSGS is a piece of that, right? Like it's kind of a subset. So we talk more broadly about chronic kidney disease. What does that look like? What are the signs and symptoms? And then we bring in patients to tell their story. And that's where the value is. That's where people can relate and was like, oh my gosh, I know that's how I feel, or my sister or my friend. The patient voice is a validating voice that can really do the most impact with education. So we did that. We've done some other collaborative programs with another organization called Black Health Matters, just trying to raise the national awareness and education around kidney disease and FSGS. Because we know that Black and Brown communities are more inclined to have APOL1 FSGS. And so we want people to know more about that.
Right. More inclined to have it and not know about it at all. I can certainly appreciate your strategy there. Very strategic in targeting a community that is disproportionately affected. Dr. Igbona, I want to ask you, on the Vertex side, what is Vertex doing to really get additional information out there regarding chronic kidney disease to the community?
Well, I think as part of our efforts to develop treatments that transform the lives of patients, we are certainly working with organizations like NephCure and the American Association of Kidney Patients, the National Kidney Foundation, so that we understand not only the patient perspective of things, but what the clinicians need in order to have more meaningful engagement with their patients. And then we do have clinical trials where, as Kristen had mentioned, the priority is safety, ensuring that we have drugs that are safe enough, but also deliver on the promise of effectiveness so that patients do not have to live with the real burdens that come with kidney failure. I don't know if you recall from the slide I presented, it costs in order of $100,000 a year if you end up on dialysis. I mean, even if you feel great, spending that kind of money, wherever it comes from,
that's not a good feeling.
That's not a good feeling. So, what we do, we believe has a real impact on the lives of people. Clinical trials, I understand that, clinical trials may have gotten bad press, but I do know that there are lots of good people looking out for the best of patients in trials. And if sometimes there might not be a treatment out there right now, and like Kristen said, even some of those pills you pick up on the counter without a prescription, they once went through trials. So even if you may be skeptical or concerned about participating in a trial, talk about it. Talk about it with your family, talk about it with your doctor. Find out if, what are the risks that you might be taking on participating in a trial, and then make a decision rather than, just outright say you're not going to.
I think the other thing that's often lost on people is by the time a company brings a medication to human trials, it's been through a lot. It's not just developed in a petri dish and then, here, pop this pill. It goes through a lot of research. And as you mentioned, safety protocol to make sure that, no company wants to do damage, irreparable damage to anyone. I want to ask both of you, we talk a lot about the financial burden of this. Can we talk a little bit about the emotional burden and, the quality of life and how that can change someone emotionally and mentally?
Yeah, let me take a stab at that. So all I can say is that when you tell someone, having done this quite a number of times now, that, hey, your kidneys are failing, each time it's a very difficult conversation.
Mm-hmm.
It truly is difficult. Sometimes, when I get to speak to some patients and I ask them how they feel about, the situation now, they feel as if, they're going to die tomorrow. You can imagine how frightening that is,
Mm-hmm.
as if they've lost, an important part of their life. And sometimes it happens so quickly that people haven't even come to terms
Yeah.
with the fact that they have kidney disease. The fact that, okay, I have to start dialysis today. Why? When did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
I felt bad, but I didn't feel that bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's pretty frightening, and I know it's many patients end up being depressed,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes that even worsens, the opportunities or ability to speak up. So, the patient video of Dr. Richardson that was played at the beginning of this talk was a very important one. And she says you need to talk with each other, because it's when we share burdens with each other, especially with close family members, that we even begin to feel a little bit better, even under very difficult circumstances. So maybe that's, uh, you know, you would actually need a patient to actually share the way they feel. But, I'm just sharing a few of the things that I've heard and learned from patients as they deal with, things like kidney disease.
Well,
Kristen?
it's huge news to hear, like you mentioned, and Dr. Richardson said in the video that she was relieved to find out that it was something genetic and not something that she had done per se. Kristen, what's been your experience with people who find out that they have this kidney disease? How does it affect their mental health?
Yeah. So, I mean, great question. And I feel like this is an area that's not talked about enough, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
I believe more nephrologists need to be asking these social, emotional, mental health questions to their patients. Being a nurse, I talk to patients on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most impactful stories in the most recent past was I met a patient at an event, at a NephCure event. And he came to the event, last minute, found out about it, and came in. Little did I know he had emailed me the day before the event. I didn't know. But anyway, so he gets there and he comes up to me during a meet and greet time, and he was like, "I can't believe I'm meeting you. I've watched your videos. I've been on the website. I even emailed you yesterday." And he was like, "And now you're here." And he said, "So let me tell you about my story." And so he told me, he said, "I was diagnosed with FSGS in March. So this is October."
Mm.
And he said, "So I was just diagnosed." And he said, and I went through one round of a medicine, and my doctor said it didn't work. And he said, "Now I don't really know what that means." He said, "To this day, I don't really know what that means, except that it didn't work." And he said, "So my doctor told me it didn't work and said, just come back in about 6 months and you'll probably be ready for dialysis and we'll talk about a transplant." And he said, "Do you see that bridge just right back there?" Because we were outside. He said, "Do you see that bridge right over there?" He said, "I go over that bridge every day to go to work." And he said, "And since that day, I have thought to myself every time I get to that bridge that I want to stop my car and I want to jump off."
Mm.
He said, because it was absolutely the most devastating news. And he said, "Now I have an 11-year-old son. I've got a beautiful, supportive wife." He said, "I know that my life is more valuable than that." He said, "But every day going over that bridge, I've thought about stopping."
Mm.
And he said, and so anyways, he said, "Not until I met you and NephCure and learning more about this do I actually have hope." And so I told him, I said, "I am so glad that you found us." And I said, "We don't want you to live like that. It's not a way to live. And actually, your doctor should be giving you more options." This is someone who has a GFR of around 40. So it's not that he is definitely in that place where he wouldn't qualify for a clinical trial or treatment options that are currently out there. And so I said, "You know what? We need to get you a new doctor." And so we did. I connected him with a glomerular specialist in his area. The doctor was like, "Oh my gosh, sure. No problem. Give him my phone number. Here's my phone number. Just have him call me." That sort. So these are the conversations. These are the connections that NephCure has with nephrologists. because we know that not every nephrologist is really aware of FSGS or rare glomerular disease, but we need our patients to see these doctors so they can give them. We believe that every glomerular disease patient is a clinical trial patient. They should be, if their GFR is pretty much 30 or over, they should be talking to their patients about clinical trials, because that's the only way we're going to advance. So mental health awareness is definitely huge, and it needs to be talked about more often.
I absolutely agree with you. We are running out of time. And before I get to my closing remarks, I want to ask both of you, just to quickly and briefly summarize what you would want patients to take away from this and what you would want them to know, as well as clinicians.
Well, I'll start. Clinicians, spend more time with your patients. I know that that's easy for me to say, but the more time we spend, I think our patients will be better for it. For patients, I would say be bold, ask your doctor, and don't take no or I don't know for an answer. Keep on searching till you find it, and then also talk with your family. You shouldn't go through frightening circumstances like this alone.
Kristen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to echo some of what Ogo has said. I think as far as a nurse goes, I know that working over 17 years as a nurse, doctors love patients who are involved in their care, who can self-manage, who ask questions. So I would say to the doctors is that to be able to empower a patient is to educate a patient. So right, spend more time with your patient, educate them about their disease and what's going on. For the patient, I would say ask those hard questions. Don't be afraid. Just because they wear a white coat and they have an MD at the end of their name doesn't mean they're not a real person and that don't care. Because honestly, there's not one doctor out there that I know in our disease space that doesn't truly care about the patient, right? I mean, they're not here, right? For, they want to make a difference. They signed an oath, right, to make a difference and to help people. And so I want people to understand that they're real people. They do care. So I would ask the hard questions and make sure that you go to the doctor at least once a year and have your urine dipped or, have that kidney panel drawn with your labs. That's what I would say.
Yeah, they don't go through that much schooling and that much student loan debt to not actually care. I want to thank both of you, Kristen and Dr. Igbona, so much for your time this afternoon. Can you both share a web address for people to go to get more information?
Well, to learn more about Vertex and our clinical trial efforts, you can go to www.vrtx.com, and you look around, you'll certainly see something about APOL1 there.
Yeah, and for us at NephCure, we are on the web. We're also on social media, but you can go to www.nephcure.org. It's NEPHCURE.org. And then remember also rarediseasediversity.org as well.
That's exactly what I was going to say. You'll be able to find this discussion on rarediseasediversity.org. This is something that this coalition does very frequently. So also be sure to take a look at the other rare diseases that they're exploring and having experts speak about. There's a lot to learn. Even if you're not someone dealing with those diseases, empathy goes a long way in understanding what people are dealing with, because you never know. I want to say thank you so much for sharing part of your afternoon with us. I'm Adriana Hopkins. You all have a great rest of your day.